Hello. Today, our group is going to share with you the Sakoku period in Japan. The 17th to the 19th century saw Japan adopting a policy that isolated the whole country from the outside world. This long period of national isolation was called Sakoku. Sakoku literally means chain country. Japan's Tokugawa period, which lasted from 1603 to 1867, would be the final era of traditional Japanese government, culture, and society before the Meiji Restoration begins in 1868. And during this period of time, it was during the Sakoku period, it was actually headed by Tokugawa shogunate. Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu was a Japanese warrior. He was the founder and first shogun of the Tokugawa shogunate of Japan. Early in his career, he helped Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi in unifying Japan. After Hideyoshi's death in 1958, Ieyasu emerged as the most powerful feudal lord in the country after defeating his biggest rival at the famous Battle of Sekigahara and establishing a central government in Edo in 1603. He became a shogun in 1603. However, in 1605, 2 years later, he abdicated in favor of his son Hidetada. Shogun Tokugawa Hidetada, he ruled in name only, while his father Tokugawa Ieyasu continued to control the actual workings of the government until his death in 1616. But Hidetada assumed a role as a former head of the Bakufu bureaucracy after that. Hidetada's effort to isolate Japan were successfully completed by his son and successor, Tokugawa Iemitsu. Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu ruled from 1623 to 1651. And during this period of time, he crucified Christians, expelled all Europeans from Japan, and closed the borders of the country. So he came up with a foreign politics policy that continued for over 200 years after its institution. So the rationale of the shogunate behind the implementation of Sakoku in Japan was to remove any religious and colonial influence, primarily from Portugal and Spain, because they were being considered a threat to the shogunate. So near the beginning of the Tokugawa period, there were an estimated 300,000 Christians in Japan, suspicious of foreign intervention and colonialism. The Tokugawa regime acted to exclude missionaries and eventually issued a complete ban on Christianity in Japan. So Christianity was forced underground, and the dominant faith of the Tokugawa period was Confucianism, so a relatively conservative religion with a strong emphasis on loyalty and duty. So in order to close Japan off from damaging foreign influence, the Tokugawa shogunate also prohibited trade with Western nations and prevented Japanese merchants from trading abroad. So from here we'll see the Sakoku Edict 1635, which is a Japanese decree created by Ieyasu. It is intended to eliminate foreign influence, enforced by strict government rules and regulations to impose these ideas. So in the list of edicts, many of them is to highlight about the traits and also about the ban of Christianity. For instance, highlighted point number 3, it says if any Japanese returns from overseas after residing there, he must be put to death. So these are the strict rules that's being imposed even for their local people. And next, so on point number 7, it mentions if there are any southern barbarians who propagate the teachings of padres or otherwise commit crimes, they may be incarcerated in prison. So the southern barbarians in the edicts, they are actually referring to the Westerners, and padres is the name for the priest, the father of Christianity. So, and it also listed in the edict that the tradings are only allowed to take place in the 5 stipulated places, which I'm going to share with you later on, which are the 5 cities. And they also enforce strict rules on the arrival and departure of the foreign vessels. This is to ensure that the foreign vessels or the foreign tradings actually adhere to what the Japanese has set out the rules for them. And they are very strict on the timing as well. Whoever that has arrived late or arrived later than the stipulated time, they might not be able to trade with the Japanese. So the Japanese held they expect, like, if the foreigners, when they come and trade, they expect them to follow strictly on the rules that's being imposed, and they will not allow for any delay, because they find that if you are trading with us, you should follow what we have set out to you. So it makes it very difficult for even other countries to try to trade with Japan during the period of time. Besides the Sakoku edict, there's also an additional edicts, is like the exclusion of the Portuguese of 1639. So this exclusion is strictly referring to the Portuguese, because they would not want Christianity to further spread in Japan, which eventually they think that it's gonna affect the shogunate. Besides that, they also have the memorandum sent out given to those who come to trade, especially the Dutch and the Chinese, because during the Sakoku period, they traded most with these 2 countries. So they would like to ensure that no Christians are on board on these vessels when they come to trade. So although I have mentioned that during this period of time, Japan is a closed country, but they are not completely isolated under the policy, because it was a system in which strict regulations were applied to commerce and foreign relations by the shogunate and by certain feudal domains. So based on this map, as you can see, during the implementation of Sakoku edicts, Japan strictly traded only with 5 entities at 4 gateways. So the entities are actually highlighted in red colors, and the gateways are highlighted in green colors. So the policy stated that the only European vessels that's allowed to trade is the Dutch at Dejima in Nagasaki. They are also trade with China at Nagasaki as well. So the trade with Korea was limited to the Tsushima domain, while the trade with Ainu people was limited to the Matsume domain in Hokkaido, and the trade with the Ryukyu kingdom took place in Satsuma domain. Okay, for next, Machi is gonna share with us some of the series of major events that happened during the Sakoku period.
Next, I'm gonna talk about series of major events. Ieyasu banned Christianity in 1612, and from 1629, Iemitsu introduced Fumie. Fumie means stepping on a picture. Iemitsu forced people to step on a picture of Jesus to prove that they are not Christian. If people hesitate to do it, they were punished. In 1637, Shimabara Rebellion happened. Since Shimabara clans extorted a lot of money from poor peasants, and also they suppressed Christians, they cooperated each other and rebelled against them. His name, Amakusa Shiro, he was just 16 years old, but he was trusted by a lot of other Christians, and he became a leader of the rebellion. This is the biggest rebellion in Japanese history. This island is called Dejima. This is a man-made island in Nagasaki, southern part of Japan. This fan-shaped island is the only place Japan could trade with European countries. Iemitsu built this island because he wanted all the Portuguese to move to here and prevent Japanese people from Christianity. After Shimabara Rebellion, Iemitsu decided not to trade with Portugal. However, Dutch completely separated Christianity and trade, so Japan basically traded with Dutch in Dejima. These are things Japan and Dutch exchanged during the trades. Japan imported silk from Dutch, and Dutch got them in China and sold them to Japan. Later, Japan imported books, especially medical and science journals, and these books helped Japanese technology a lot. On the other hand, Japan mainly exported gold, silver, and copper. Tokugawa Shogunate ordered Dutch to write this Fusetsugaki. These are documents about foreign countries, especially Europe. Japan stopped trading with Spain and Portugal, so they asked Dutch to report what they are doing currently. Later, it comes to contain information not only Europe, but also India and China. The head of Dutch trading office in Dejima was in charge of writing this document. It helped Japan a lot because Japan only had limited information about other countries.
Thank you, Machi. So next, I'm going to share with you how the seclusion policy actually ended with Paris Convention, which is also known as the Treaty of Kanagawa. So we see the important figure of this event is actually Matthew C. Perry, also known as Commodore Perry. Commodore was a courtesy title reserved for captains in command of a fleet or squadron in the Continental Navy, which is now known as the US Navy. So the biggest reason that the United States sent Commodore Perry to Japan because the US wished to use Japan as a coaling base, or a base where steamships which use coals could restock their coal supply, and Japan was deemed as a perfect location. And secondly, another big reason for the United States wanting to open Japan was to make sure shipwrecked sailors in Japan receive good treatment. And lastly, the final reason was for trade. The trading had brought in a lot of revenue for the Americans, and they wanted to trade more with other countries to increase revenues. So what happened was on July 14, 1853, Commodore Perry actually entered the Bay of Edo, the capital city, with 4 American warships that was puffing black smoke, where you can see the backdrop of the PowerPoints that show how the Japanese depicted the arrival of Commodore Perry in a Japanese woodblock print artwork. So what happened was Commodore Perry and his warships blockaded the bay and prevented any food or supplies from entering the country. So the Japanese were panicked during the period of time, and this created a serious political crisis. So Commodore Perry, on behalf of the United States, actually demanded Japan to sign a treaty opening up for free trade. So what he did was he began to fire his cannons as a show of force and threatened total destruction if Japanese did not submit to their demand. So the Japanese, which they have isolated for the prior 218 years, were technologically far behind and were no match for the modern American warship. So in this sense, the Kurofune also became a symbol of the ending of the isolation. This is a Japanese woodblock print of Perry and other high-ranking American seamen. Because what happened was he went to Japan during the first visit with 4 ships, and a couple of months later he went back for a second time with 7 warships, and that was in February 1854. The Japanese technology was no match with what the American warship was, so they agreed to submit to US ships to the ports of Shimoda and Hakodate. So the treaty was ratified on February 21st, 1855. Commodore Perry concluded the treaty with representative of the shogun, and during that period of time, the shogun who signed the treaty was Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. So that actually ended the Sakoku period, and Japan was eventually open to foreign influences. The Japanese were shoved under the unequal treaty system, which characterized Asian and Western relations during that period of time. Externally, the treaty led to the United States-Japan Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which is also known as the Harris Treaty of 1858, which allowed the establishment of foreign concessions, extraterritoriality for foreigners, and minimal import taxes for foreign goods. Followed by similar agreements with the United States, with the United Kingdom, which is known as the Anglo-Japanese Friendship Treaty, October 1854. Followed by a treaty with the Russians, is the Treaty of Shimoda, 7th February 1855. And lastly, the treaty with the French, also known as the Treaty of Amity and Commerce between France and Japan, 9 October 1858. So, Hector will share more with you on the impacts of Sakoku on Japan during the period of time.
So I'm going to be talking about some of the effects that Sakoku had on Japan. So one of the most important effects Sakoku had on Japan was that it brought internal stability, considering that Japan had been in a state of chaos since the Oni War and the Sengoku Fudai. So Hideyoshi unified Japan. However, the future political development of Japan was uncertain, and so that's why the Tokugawas adopted a strict control mechanisms to maintain their rule. Ultimately, their adoption of the Sakoku policy freed Japan from foreign intrusion. So, the Sakoku policy allowed Japan to enter a long period of economic and social prosperity. For example, there was an increase in agriculture and commerce. Transportation facilities were constructed, such as the Tokaido Road shown in the slide. This road was mainly used for traveling and connected Kyoto to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo. Additionally, people from all backgrounds indulged themselves in luxurious and pleasure-seeking lives. And lastly, cities such as Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto grew one after the other. So since Japan was isolated from the rest of the world, the only learning intellectuals could really do was native learning. And what did this mean? Well, this meant a revival of the classical works. The teachings of Confucianism were promoted while Christianity was being suppressed, and this all resulted in the revival of Shintoism and Buddhism in Japan. The Dai Nihonshi book is one of the works that was written during this time period and is credited to the Mito clan. As far as Western studies goes, Rangaku was the only Western study allowed, and this was due to the fact that the Dutch were the only ones allowed in Japan. And here's a picture of the Rangaku by Sugita Genpaku. As you can see, it looks really, really nice. So a few more effects of Sakoku on Japan. For example, the halt of external stimuli resulted in a lack of creativity in workmanship among artisans. Authors had to work on their own without external influence. Scholars could only be engaged in commentary on classicals due to the discouragement of individuality and boldness of expression. And lastly, there was no social mobility. So before the Sakoku policy, many Japanese adventurers were found as outside of Japan. And there were Japanese settlements in a lot of places, such as Luzon, Java, Malaya, and Sumatra. But after the Sakoku policy, foreign settlements pretty much disappeared, vanished, as well as travel abroad, obviously. Vessels such as the Red Seal ships came to a halt, and contact with the outside world was cut off completely. Well, not completely, but to a great extent. And this pretty much meant that there was no more Western science and technology coming in. So here's a picture of the Shuinsen, the Red Seal ship. And pretty much these were Japanese armed merchant sailing ships bound for Southeast Asian ports with Red Seal letters patent issued by the early Tokugawa shogunate in the first half of the 17th century. So because of the Sakoku policy and the isolation from the rest of the world, Japan stopped improving its science and technology, which caused them to fall behind other nations in terms of power and knowledge about the world. The Dutch Dangaku was obviously not enough, as it was only available to a select few, and so the Sakoku policy did isolate Japan from the rest of the world, but in the end, the Tokugawa shogunate was not able to hold onto the policy. So Perry's black ships proved to be too powerful to stop, and this ultimately led to the end of the Tokugawa shogunate, or the Tokugawa era, yeah. So now, moving on to discussion questions.